this whole series of practicing the way and what that practically looks like to really follow Jesus. Because, if you read the Bible, Jesus' main actual calling, it didn't look like what maybe a lot of you all heard growing up. I know a lot of you all probably heard things like, hey, accept Jesus into your heart as your Lord and Savior, or different phrases like that. Or whenever I was a teenager, they do like, make a decision for Jesus right here, right now, those kinds of things. But it all seemed, that it's clear in what it means, but all at the same time, Jesus' invitation to people was really broad and open-ended. He just said, follow me. And then the expectation was they would watch him carefully. And that becomes a little bit more opaque nowadays because we don't have Jesus here to physically follow around. But what we do have are these documents of what he did in his everyday life. And then the subsequent letters of the people who followed him saying, hey, what does it mean to be a follower? What does it mean to do church together? And so that's what this whole series has been about, is taking spiritual disciplines or different concepts like prayer or fasting, or even how we've been going over the last couple weeks of what it means for church to be a family. And what does that look like practically, tangibly? And so last week, David gave us a tee up for the whole concept of family and did that mostly through the vein of communion. What does that look like for us to come around the Lord's Supper table together? And what it meant for the disciples and for Jesus when they did it, and all the different views that one could take of that throughout church history, and primarily where Southern Baptist evangelical flavored churches land in that memorial view of the Lord's Supper. But today, for family, what we're going to be looking at primarily are these different familial terms that God uses to identify himself throughout the Bible. And there are a number of them, but we're going to look at three of those in particular. And the first one, I'm certain a lot of you all are very familiar with. And that one is Father. That he is not only a gracious and a gentle, but in some ways an absolutely ferocious father. And then the next one, here's where I might throw you a little bit of a curveball, because I know your brain's going to automatically go to son, because that's a family term. No. We're going to look at God as a brother. And then lastly, we're going to look at God as, and here's the other one that might throw you for a little bit of loop, but God as husband. Because we get all three of those terms throughout the Bible, and especially in the New Testament, those last two. So if you want to open up your Bibles to Hebrews 2, the first passage we're going to look at that I think really encapsulates all three of these is in Hebrews 2. And it starts at verse 9. And in the opening parts of Hebrews, this author is just trying to set up the supremacy of Jesus to everything else, to how he fulfills the law, and especially how Jesus is better than vague supernatural beings, because whoever this group of Hebrews were at the time seemed to have a very large obsession with angelic beings and how angelic things can be at work all around them. And the author is just saying that Christ is better to all of those things. But what we're going to look at here, starting at verse 9, is a passage that explains God as, I think, in all three of these, as father, brother, and as husband in some sense. And so it says this, but we see him who for a little while was made lower than the angels, namely Jesus, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. For it was fitting that he, for whom and by whom all things exist, in bringing many sons to glory, should make the founder of their salvation perfect through suffering. For he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified all have one source. That is why he is not ashamed to call them brothers, saying, I will tell of your name to my brothers in the midst of the congregation. I will sing your praise. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again, behold, I and the children God has given me. Since, therefore, the children share in flesh and blood, he himself likewise partook of the same things, that through death he might destroy the one who has power of death, that is the devil, and deliver all those who through fear of death were subject to lifelong slavery. For surely it is not angels that he helps, but he helps the offspring of Abraham. Therefore, he had to be made like his brothers in every respect, so that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in the service of God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. For because he himself has suffered when tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. And so in all of these, we see every single one of these pictures of God in a familial sense, because it's primarily focused on Jesus, yes, as the Son of God, but then here Jesus specifically identifies with you and I as kin, as brothers, as sisters, saying that because of the work I have done to the glory of our Father, then he is actively saving the children of Abraham. And it's a title that's existing in the Old Testament that both John the Baptist and Jesus blew the doors wide open on. Because there was a point in which John was preaching things that sounded very strange to the religious elite. And they come to meet him out in the desert. Jesus' cousin, John the Baptist, wore funky clothes, ate bugs. You know, that kid you would stay away from on the playground. Turned out to be the guy who would herald the Messiah. And he comes, and the religious leaders come to him, and they start asking him questions, and he just unloads on these guys. Because both John the Baptist and Jesus wound up calling the religious elite a brood of vipers. And I don't know if you've ever seen a brood of snakes. I'm not frightened of snakes particularly. I mean, I give them a berth because I'm not Ralph Duran, so I don't know which ones are the dangerous noodles and which ones are the harmless noodles. So I just stay away from all of them, but they don't frighten me. But if you've ever seen a brood of baby snakes all just kind of writhing in a mass, it's unpleasant. And so that's what he's equating them to. And they're eventually he tells them, don't consider your genetic lineage from Abraham anything at all to be considered. Because if God really wanted to, he could make children of Abraham out of rocks. So your genetic line means nothing here. And Jesus then later affirms that message by telling those same religious elite, my Father is God, you are children of Satan. That's a bold thing to say to the religious leaders. And then Paul really hammers on this later when he writes to the Galatians saying there's no slave nor free, Jew or Greek, man or woman, for we are all of God. And so in this passage we see Jesus as Son uniting his brothers and sisters to the Father through the work that he did. And he, by extension, also says the children that you have given me. So our brother then also identifies that these are children that he has, and yet children that he has both offered up to God, meaning that he has a familial headship here in some sense, where I think is where we see the husband aspect. But we're going to look at each of these a little bit. So Father is a little bit more familiar with all of us, but at the very least, it's worth unpacking what the Bible means by Father and all the imagery that it's trying to put in there. And you don't have to follow me to all these places. I'm going to be jumping around a bit, and they should all be up on the screen. But for Father, I'm going to look a little bit. And maybe that one, I might be running low on batteries. No. Yep. It says I'm running low down here. But in Zephaniah, this prophet is telling all of Israel that they should be expecting judgment from Babylon and some of the other surrounding nations. And this feels gross for a lot of us, because a lot of us kind of grew up, at least me, I know some of you all, a little bit older than I am, but at the very least, you were around in the 2000s, I think, if you're older than me and still sitting here. So you can remember all of the very sort of seeker-friendly things where Jesus is very lovey-dovey and touchy, and he's like a big cosmic teddy bear, and he just loves you. And so there's a whole bunch of us right around my age that get squeamish whenever we read things like this, because it just feels icky, and we don't really have a good explanation for it. But this is God literally telling Judah, some of his chosen people, that he is sending a judgment directly toward them, where he says this. It's in Zephaniah 1, starting at verse 2, and I'm going to read down to 6. It says, I will utterly sweep away everything from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will sweep away man and beast. I will sweep away the birds of the heavens and the fish of the sea and the rubble of the wicked. I will cut off mankind from the face of the earth, declares the Lord. I will stretch out my hand against Judah and against all of the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and I will cut off this place, the remnant of Baal, and the name of the idolatrous priests from among the priests, those who bow down to the roofs, to the hosts of heavens, those who bow down and swear to the Lord, and yet swear by Milcom. And that was a pagan god. Those who have turned back from following the Lord, who do not seek the Lord or inquire of him. So it's just a lot. Now, to a certain degree, we have to look at it from a legal view, because in the book of Deuteronomy, God lays out for all of Israel, here's the conditions of the covenant. And the list of blessings from the covenant was like half or even a third of the length of the list of curses if they weren't able to keep it. And God didn't automatically expect them to do that. He just said, Moses, communicate this to the people, and if they agree to it, then it's on them. And Israel agrees to the terms. So to a certain degree, God's just keeping up his end of the contract here. And it feels so harsh to a lot of us. But all at the same time, this really isn't all that different from the words that we get about God and Jesus, cuddly Jesus, from the New Testament. Whenever Paul would say things to the Corinthian church like, I need you to abandon that brother who's having inappropriate relationships with his stepmother to Satan. But not just let Satan have him just because. It was so that he could be purged of his sin. Jesus says something similar about Peter at the Last Supper, where he says, Satan asked to sift you like wheat. And the implication being that Jesus gave him a limited permission to tempt Peter. And he says directly to Peter's face, I'm giving you the warning ahead of time, so that way, when I reinstate you, you're ready to lead the church. He tells him that point blank at the Last Supper. Peter does not get it at all. Granted, that's a weird thing to say to somebody over dinner. And this even gets affirmed in Hebrews, because the author of Hebrews tells us that God as a father disciplines the children that he loves. It's been a minute since my father has disciplined me, because I'm 31. I don't ever recall liking it very much. And regardless of how wise it was, it always seemed very unfair to me and not the good end of the deal. And I never recall my father saying the cheesy words, this hurts me more than it hurts you, while getting cracked on the backside. He never said that. I don't recall. But I know for a fact, because my dad is a very gentle man, I don't think he ever enjoyed punishing me, whether it was a swat when I was little or grounding me when I was older. At no point in Scripture do we see God relishing in this, but rather he hands those he loves over for a short time to the consequences of their own decisions, for the hopes that they will be disciplined enough to correct their behaviors, like any father. And it doesn't suddenly become unfair or cosmically unjust just because God is doing it and not somebody we can't touch and see and shake our fist at and be like, I hate you, Dad, and slam the door. You can't really do that to God, or at least not literally. But that same God who does that, as a discipliner, even a strict discipliner, he's absolutely ferocious whenever it comes to defending this same family that he just disciplined. Because but a few verses later in Zephaniah 2, he tells this to the nations that are getting ready to attack Israel as their form of discipline. He tells all of them, gather together. Yes, gather, O shameless nation. being Babylon, before the decree that takes effect, before the day passes away like chaff, before there comes upon you the burning anger of the Lord, before there comes upon you the day of the anger of the Lord. Seek the Lord, all you humble of the land, who do his just commands. Seek righteousness, seek humility. Perhaps you may be hidden from the day of the anger of the Lord. For Gaza shall be deserted. Ashkelon will become like a desolation. Ashdod's people shall be driven out at noon, and Ekron shall be uprooted. Woe to you, the inhabitants of the sea coast, you nation of the Cherethites. The word of the Lord is against you, O Canaan, land of the Philistines, and I will destroy you until no inhabitant is left. And you, O sea coast, shall be like pastures with meadows for shepherds and folds for flocks. The seacoast shall become the possession of the remnant of the house of Judah, on which they shall graze. And in those houses of Ashkelon they will lie down at evening. For the Lord their God will be mindful of them and restore their fortunes. And so the same God who disciplines won't tolerate other people attacking his family. And he only allows the discipline to last for a very short while until the lesson is learned. And then he immediately plans to restore his children right back to their proper place. And skipping forward quite a bit in John, it's not just that God is Father to his people corporately, either Israel in the Old Testament or all of us now who have his Spirit within us. He's not just some far-off Father. He's a very close and intimate Father with each and every single one of us. For just as he was getting ready to finish that same supper where he talked to Peter, Jesus told all of the disciples something very interesting in John 16. At verse 26, he's telling them, "In that day you will ask in my name. And I do not say to you that I will ask the Father on your behalf. For the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God." And so now Jesus sets this new parameter that there's no longer a need for a priest or a temple or anybody else to stand between you and your Father. His work has done enough, and God will hear you directly. Because he's not just Father to us in some vague corporate sense, but rather Father to you individually. And you can pray and speak with him anytime. You don't have to go to a special place. You don't have to wash in the special bath to do the special thing. And hopefully, if people ring the right bells and say the right things and do the right chants, you can somehow, some way, maybe see God. But rather, your Father loves you because you love Christ, and he is ready and eager to hear anything you might have to say to him as a good Father. Whenever God calls himself Father, it is a holistic picture of Father. Loving, gentle, even disciplinarian when he needs to be. But then ferociously defends his family if he needs to, because I don't want to be the recipient of what he says in Zephaniah 2. And through all that work of Jesus, and like I said, our brain wants to immediately shift, Jesus, Son. But we need to focus really on that phrase of being brother with Christ. Because Jesus is the Son of God, but his familial connection to us, his sibling, his brother. Yes, he's our king, but there's a deeper intimacy than that. There's a familial connection. And we know that because he tells his followers at the Last Supper, a slave doesn't know what his master's business is, but the son does. And now the Son is telling all of you, you are my friends. You are now a part of the fold. You are a part of the family. And we even see Paul saying things like, through Christ's, not Paul, but rather at the beginning of John's gospel, he even says that by the work of Jesus, now the followers of Jesus have the right. Understand that word that John uses. They have the right, not just like the privilege, the potential, the right to be called children of the Most High. And then Paul amplifies that even further by just saying, not only are you children of God, not only are you siblings with Christ, Paul goes so far in the book of Romans to say, and if you are brothers with Christ, if you are children of God, as Christ is the heir to all things, that makes all of you co-heirs. He just says it point blank. There is a strong brotherly, intimate connection between us and Christ. And this comes largely through his humility, like we read in Hebrews 2. But Philippians 2 really unpacks a lot of that humility for us, because there's this poem in chapter 2. You don't really see it in English, because we're not, I don't know about you all, I'm not a Greek reader, and Greek is a bunch of nonsense, okay? New Testament Greek, no bueno. I don't get along with it, all right? I got the grade I needed to in the class, and we're good, but I don't like it. But in chapter 2 of Philippians, starting at verse 4, at least a part of this poem, the part we're concerned about, says this: let each of you look not only to his own interests, but the interests of others. Have this in mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in form of God, did not count equality with God as anything to be grasped, but rather emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. And being found in human form, he humbled himself to the point of death, and even death on a cross. The whole familial connection we have with God, our kinship with Christ as brothers, as sisters, as co-heirs, all of that is possible because of Jesus' humility. Which I don't know if you know this, and maybe some of you all are different if you're big brothers, because my big brother is not a particularly boastful individual, but being a humble big brother is not usually what big brothers are known for. They're usually known for things like noogies and like impaling you with something, and when you start to cry, go, shh, you're fine, you're fine, you're fine. Like it's cool, man. All the big brothers throughout the Bible are usually not role models. And God consistently winds up picking the younger heir all throughout the Old Testament. But this time, the firstborn is actually a humble, gentle, and loving brother who cares for his younger siblings and tells God, I have not lost a single one of them. Because I never had like a blowhard of a big brother. He's actually a very gentle man. If you've never met my brother Jonathan, he's very quiet and he's very friendly, and he's not a braggadocious guy. He's just not. But there were times where I would try to follow him in the woods, and he'd be like, keep up. And if I was a little dot in the distance, he'd be like, it's your own fault. You can keep up or not. He did do that a time or two, but Christ doesn't do that. He says, I haven't lost a single one of them. And he keeps them all close. And that's only accomplished by his humility. And then Paul's charge to all of us is to let that humility be what defines us toward one another. If Christ is that humble and serves his siblings, you should be humble and serve your siblings as well, and make sure none of them are lost. We can't keep them eternally found. That's Christ's job. But we can pick up a phone and make sure somebody who seems like they're wandering isn't lost. Or shoot a text to somebody if we haven't seen them for a while. Because that much, at the very least, is on us. And lastly, and maybe this is the one that gets a little bit confusing or tricky and probably makes you the most uncomfortable, that would be God as husband. But we get that imagery very clearly in the New Testament. And I'm going to, anybody who gets really antsy at the moment right now, let me tell you, Memorial Baptist is not some weird fertility cult, all right? You don't marry God. That's not what I'm saying. We're going to get that out of our head right now. None of the ooh-woo, happy-feely, Jesus is your boyfriend stuff. We're not doing that here. Okay? But we do get very explicit husband imagery in the New Testament. And this passage, all right, I'm not going to go into all of the the landmines in Ephesians 5 that normally come up in the American context about all the arguments between complementarianism and egalitarianism and this and that and whatever. We're not worried about that aspect of this passage so much, because this is a passage of Paul instructing husbands and wives on how to treat one another. But rather, we're going to look at the way that Paul characterizes God and Jesus with these commands to us in Ephesians 5. And it's starting at verse 22. He says this, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also husbands should submit to everything to their husbands." Now, husbands, and catch this, all right? If there's any ladies in the room that got uncomfortable with that, notice your all commands for your husband is like 2 sentences long. And then Paul gives the dudes like a paragraph, because he knows we're harder to manage. So take it as a compliment. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her and washing her of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife will love himself, for no one has ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does for the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. The whole passage is filled with commands for us, but all of it is saying this is what Christ and God do for us. And this is our disposition toward God. So this should be our disposition toward one another. The nature of God is what defines all of our parameters in life and with one another. It's not just some arbitrary thing somebody made up because they happen to like one sex more than the other, or ancient whatever's archaic stuff that we just want to wave our hands at because we don't like the way it sounds in the 21st century. Christ is very explicitly throughout the New Testament called the husband of the church, and the church is the bride. And it's also defined as body, because when a man and a woman are married, they become one flesh. So now God is one with his people. And so this bride is now also his body. And in the same way anybody would naturally want to take care of their own body, Christ gives up everything to take care of his bride. This is the way Christ has related to us. But then it also puts a sense of expectation on us as the body, as bride. Because you have expectations of family members. If I'm a brother, the expectation is I should love my siblings. If you're a parent, the expectation is you love your spouse, you love your children. The entire expectation of familial connection is love, and a deep kind of love that means you love those other people more than you love yourself. And you do so in the character and the nature of Christ and the nature of our Father, being that it's utterly humble and will do what needs to be done for his family members. You make sure none are lost, and if you need to be, you can be ferocious. I'm not telling you to do any Old Testament curse type stuff. God's big enough to handle that stuff on his own. Don't be beating neighbors with a stick because they said something bad about Jesus on the internet. Don't do that. That's not good. That's not holy. God can defend himself quite well, and he's been doing so long before you got here. But there is the expectation that you defend your family. And it's not just even that, because when a family is healthy and filled with love, You all are old enough to know how all this happens, and it's not a one-for-one metaphor, so please pardon any clumsiness or points of breakdown, but families grow. New children come around. And the expectation for us as part of that family is to take part in how new brothers and sisters join the family, come into the fold, and become co-heirs. I don't know if anybody has ever loved you enough to tell you this in your life. Around here, I would think so, because I know a lot of you all. But just in case you're new-ish, or just even visiting, Jesus, God didn't orchestrate the entirety of reality to be reunited with his people. And Jesus didn't just empty himself of all divinity and come to earth and die because you specifically were the adorable little puppy in the window that he just couldn't go without. That he died for you, and that he would have died for just you. I can't say he would have or wouldn't have, but the point is that you were not saved by your own cosmic adorableness for its own sake, but rather God was reorienting all of reality so that his people, his family, the family he desired to have because he loves you, can be one with him. So yes, God loves you individually, deeply, intimately. He is your specific Father. All of the commands you get in the Bible then spread outward to your brothers and your sisters, because you were saved not just for your own sake, but for God's glory. And a part of being saved for God's glory means loving your brothers and your sisters well. And that has to be done in the way that God shows us. We see the way our Father loves us. We see the way our brother loves us. And we see the way that the head of this bride loves us. And we're told to love each other like that. Because that whole passage about husbands and wives, Paul flowed right into that from another passage just about the church, and his command just before that passage was just to say, see that you love and respect one another, and then starts talking about husbands and wives. The expectation for the whole church was deep and intimate love and respect for one another. And all this stuff on the day in, day out level looks a little bit different for everybody. There's quite a few of us in this room, so I don't expect everybody to just have this deep and vast and intimate knowledge of everything ever happening in all the lives of everybody in this room. Because there are a lot of y'all I have known my entire life. I don't know what you did on Tuesday. That's fine. That's fine. You don't even need to know what I did on Tuesday, because that's not what we're talking about. I'm not talking about some vague sense of familiarity to feel like you checked off a box, but rather actually just really love people. And sometimes you got to learn to do that. That's not the natural posture, disposition. But like I said, we see a God who is willing to be gentle and to build up, that he listens very intently. We can listen to one another, our struggles, our joys, lift each other up, just like Paul commands. Everything God does, Paul commands to us. Listen. And even the aspect of discipline, because we're literally given a roadmap of how church discipline is supposed to work in here. Churches, especially evangelical ones, have never been particularly good about it. Usually the churches just break up, and then half of the congregation goes on that side of town, and then the other half stays. Baptists are great about that. We break up more than 90s boy bands. It's one of our best features. But we have a roadmap for even disciplining. We've been given a Christ all throughout the Last Supper. Just read the Last Supper. He gives them very explicit, specific commands of, these are your brothers. Here's all the ways that you love them. But all of Christ's love for his brothers was completely defined by humility and obedience. And then he also defined it himself to God by saying, I didn't lose any of them. So by actually holding people close, and if you don't see them in the room for a number of weeks, to recognize that, and just ask them where they've been or if they're okay. I was at a wedding the other day and I didn't see somebody I was expecting to see, so I just shot them a text like, "Are you okay?" Because I knew they had a sick family member and I just wanted to make sure maybe they weren't caught up with their sick family member. And they were fine. They just had a health thing. But still, I didn't let the absence go unnoticed just because I loved them. And then to understand that if I'm a part of this family, at the end of the day, there are expectations of me for other people. I owe something to other people because I owe everything to Jesus. And part of that is to help the family grow. And that was kind of a doozy to be preparing to speak to y'all this week, because I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time now, and whenever you do this kind of stuff, you just kind of tend to get around these kind of folks. And I can't, I know there are times where I've had conversations about Jesus to curious folks over the last 10 years. Of course, I've had plenty of those. I can't recall if I was ever the person to, reap those, if those were in fact good seeds. Which is rough, personally. To say, man, I don't know where those went. And that puts a little pang of guilt in you to feel like, man, I hope I didn't drop the ball. But it's our job. I don't know if it's all of us corporately. It's not just like David and Adam and mine and Jimmy's job just because we have pastor whatever in front of our name to just go out and find random people and start getting them in the door. That's for you all too. That's your all's primary job, actually, is to help make new family members. And then it's the pastor's job to incorporate and take care of the new family members. So if you've got nothing else to do this week, or maybe none of these other things are convicting you, go find somebody that might look like they're lost or wandering and broken and don't have a family, and bring them into a family that's eager and waiting. But then if somebody brings a new person in the door, it's incumbent on all of the rest of us in the room to not just expect the same 5 or 6 uber talkative people in the sanctuary, because we all know who the really talkative ones are, who are really good at small talk. I don't have the spiritual gift of small talk. I wish I did. And it creates awkward exchanges because I'm fine with silence, which means I'm like a stranger's worst nightmare in an elevator, because I'll just gladly sit there silently with you and I can tell it's really bothering them, and I don't get being bothered by silence. Anyways, that was a random aside. I have character flaws. But it's incumbent upon all of us to make the new people feel welcomed. It's not our job to necessarily screen them first, try to filter them out, feel them out, shake them down, see if they're going to be a good fit, but to love them and love on them. Because one of our brothers and sisters has loved this person enough to try to bring them into the fold. So go love on them. Text people, call people, give them a hug, give them a handshake, let them know you care about them, especially if you haven't seen them for a few weeks. But we are a family united by a father, a brother, a husband, but ultimately a God of the universe who loves us deeply and asks us to emulate those aspects of himself. So I want to invite the band to come back up at this time. And we're just going to respond this morning, hopefully by just asking God, how can we emulate these character traits, these things that he has asked us to do for other people so that we can help the family grow and to take care of one another well so we can properly follow him, to follow Christ in his way. What does that look like for us? And you can just ask the Spirit point blank, where am I lacking? He'll tell you. And he'll be very honest, and it's uncomfortable. Because it was uncomfortable for me this week to learn I'm lacking in the helping of a family grow department. But he'll tell you. And be open to that. And whenever you feel the Spirit telling you, moving you, trying to push you to love somebody here in a very specific way, just be open to that. It's weird. It's awkward. I get it. Our disposition is one to take care of ours, me and mine, my tribe, my family, my unit. And that's my other family on Sundays. But we have to fight that and learn what it really means to do life together. So just take some time with the Lord this morning to respond however you need to. If you need to sit and pray, please feel free to do so. If you'd like to rise and join us in singing, feel free to do so. But just take some time with the Lord this morning.